Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. I'm your host, Dalia Gebrial, and joining me is Novara's very own Rivkah Brown. Rivkah, how you doing?
I'm doing good, and I'm going to say it just so that I never have to say it again in my life, but Jenny Leg?
Oh, I just don't want another one. Very sporty spice, though. You're looking good, Rivkah. I like the little athleisure look. It's not a look I can really pull off very easily, so whenever I see babes pulling it off, I'm always like, you go, it looks good. Okay, coming up later tonight, we'll run through all the general election campaign launches that took place today. We'll also discuss the case of the pro-Palestine protester charged for a placard depicting Sunak as a coconut, and the debate about whether or not the UK should open up a family visa scheme for Palestinians. Stay tuned for all of that. Election campaigns have kicked off today for the 2024 general election as the country prepares to go to the polls on July 4th. It follows Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's rain-soaked announcement outside Downing Street yesterday. But as Dee Ream's "things can only get better" almost drowned out the Tory leader's words, many were wondering why call the election now? After he'd dried off, Sunak posted his explanation.
I've just come back in from calling the general election and I wanted to explain to you why. Our economy is now growing faster than France, Germany and the United States. And this morning we received the welcome news that inflation has returned to normal. Now this is a sign that our plan and our priorities are working. Now I know it hasn't always been easy and I know you're only just starting to feel the benefits. But this hard-won economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. And that's why I've called the election. So that we can decide whether we want to build on the progress that we've made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Now, I believe that our plan and the bold actions that we're prepared to take will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
So let me get this straight. Things are just starting to get better. Me and the people I know didn't notice that. But that means that now's the time to ask the country whether we should keep making things better. The problem there is that while inflation has fallen significantly, people aren't feeling it, and they won't be for a while. So an economic bounce isn't going to help the Tories turn the electoral tide. And a lot of the electorate are bound to remember that the economic problems Sunak claims have been solved were largely caused by other Tories, like Liz Truss. So it's not a very convincing line of reasoning. A little more convincing, however, is the line given to Times Radio Kate McCann, who posted this. Bumped into senior member of Team Sunak leaving Downing Street this evening. I asked, why now? They said this July date has been a slow burn for the PM and better economic news coupled with a fear that public have stopped listening were deciding factors. The biggest, though, things have started to go wrong. That's going to keep happening. And you don't want to be sat there in Downing Street all summer while they do. It's a positive outlook. McCann's account was backed up by a story in the Times. One Downing Street source told the paper this. The Prime Minister didn't want to wait until the autumn because he was worried that once we got past the summer, everything would be dominated by when the election was going to be called and it would look like he was clinging on. This way he can seize the agenda and set out a case for why people should trust him with 5 more years. Local election results also played a role in Sunak's thinking. Another source said this. We had broadly made the decision to go, but waited for the outcome of the locals. When Ben Houchen, the Tees Valley mayor, won, that was it. Ben Houchen is the Tory mayor of Tees Valley, who managed to hold the seat despite an almost 20-point drop in vote share. Perhaps that was the last bit of good news Sunak thought the Tories were going to get. The Times also reports that most of Sunak's ministers were surprised by his decision. Some of them weren't even in the country when he called an emergency cabinet meeting yesterday afternoon. Foreign Secretary David Cameron had just arrived in Tirana, Albania, where the university had festooned its main building with Union Jacks and his picture. A call to attend the meeting forced him to leave shortly after landing. That's what you get from sucking up to David Cameron. And when Sunak told the cabinet his decision, not everyone was convinced, with some believing an autumn election would leave more time for economic improvements to trickle through the electorate. One minister told the Times this. I just don't get it. We need to show people that the economy is really turning around and we're simply not there yet. We needed more time. The idea that you wrong-foot Labour is nonsense. Yes, they'll be surprised, but they're ready. Perhaps, though, the most powerful reason was that Sunak just knew the game was up. Of his 5 pledges, he's achieved only 2. Inflation has more than halved and the economy has grown marginally in recent months. But national debt has also grown and NHS waiting lists are higher than when he made the pledges. So that leaves small boats. Sunak essentially pinned his career to the inhumane Rwanda scheme and banked on right-wing voters to get him back into Downing Street once deportations began. But he's now confirmed, thankfully, that there will be no flights before the next election. That's good news for asylum seekers and humanity in general, but it also shows that Sunak may have decided to jump before admitting the failure of his flagship scheme. The decision to go for a July the 4th election is not going down well with Tory MPs. The New Statement's Rachel Cunliffe reported this. It's hard to overstate just how upset and frustrated Conservative MPs and campaigners are right now. A selection of comments. It's a terrible idea, cruel, heartbreaking, I don't get it, really odd, don't even start, what a shit show, he's given up, we deserve to lose. Oh, Conservative tears, how delicious. Meanwhile, GB News' Christopher Hope said this. Wow, extraordinary but true. Some furious Conservative MPs are tonight working on a plot to call off the general election by replacing Rishi Sunak as leader before Parliament is dissolved next Thursday. One rebel Tory MP tells me he believes several more letters of no confidence in Sunak have been submitted to 1922 chairman Sir Graham Brady. I mean, that's never going to happen, but it does show how furious Tory MPs are at the prospect of losing their seats and their parliamentary salaries sooner than they expected. They'll have to be out by the time Parliament dissolves next Thursday, and most of them won't be coming back. Rivkah, which of these many different explanations do you buy for why now is the time Rishi Sunak chose for an election?
Well, I'm really enjoying the various divinations of lobby journalists looking into their magic 8-ball and talking to their anonymous Whitehall sources and Westminster sources about why Rishi Sunak is leaving. Kind of feels like it's mostly just to justify the need for their own jobs, because I actually think everyone can see the reason that Rishi Sunak is calling an election now. And it's the exact same reason he walked out of Downing Street into the pouring rain and then uploaded a video to his social media channels that was like just an absolute shit show. You couldn't even see it. Like, the brightness was just appalling. It's that he's given up. He's just had enough. You know, he was born to rule. He went to Winchester College, then to Stanford Business School. He's kind of failed upwards his entire life. And he thought this job would be easy, and it isn't. It's the first time that he's discovered that he's bad at something, and he just doesn't like it. You know, he'd much rather spend the summer holidaying in Santa Monica in his second home. You know, it probably doesn't help that Shatter, his wife's non-dom status is about to, you know, the time that she's allowed to spend in the UK is about to expire. It's just not fun anymore, basically, being the Prime Minister. And, you know, there are better paid jobs that he could be doing with much less stress. And those are the kind of jobs that he thought, you know, he was born to do, not this kind of surprisingly difficult and stressful job of having to wrestle down inflation and grow the country and, you know, get NHS waiting lists sort of in order. So I think, you know, rather than any grandiose explanation about Ben Hoochin and, you know, this, you know, the voters having forgotten about various failings of the Tory government or whatever, I honestly just think Rishi Sunak can't be asked. He wants a nice, easy life. He's looking at Nick Clegg out in Silicon Valley and being like, I want a slice of that.
I was thinking the exact same thing. I was like, this guy just wants to get his summer before it's too late. He's like, look, I'm done. I'm not really in any kind of deep or significant way, like materially staked in the future of this country. I can fly around wherever I want to go. I can, now that I've got this like Prime Minister CV line, I can now go and get all manners of like lucrative employment in, you know, the corporate sector, earning probably even more than I was earning before. it was a fun game while it lasted. It's now getting boring and kind of long. And I don't like the fact that people aren't nice to me. That's also kind of weird. I'm used to people sucking up to me all the time. And now it just kind of feels like every day I wake up and, the media is trashing me. People hate me. I'd rather just go and sit on the beach in Santa Monica. And, look, if I had no scruples, I wouldn't blame him. But unfortunately, I do. So I'm going to be in the trenches here trying to make Britain actually a better place. So now that Sunak has decided to have this election on July 4th, let's see how the Conservatives kicked off their campaign.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister.
Friends, thank you. It is great to be with you all this evening. Great to be with you all the evening. You are the lifeblood of our incredible party, and I can tell by this reception that you are up for this general election.
Woo! Yeah! God, if that is the lifeblood of the party, it's worse than I thought. At the launch, Sunak revealed what is likely to be the major message of his party's election campaign.
We Conservatives have got a clear plan, with bold action, to secure our future. We're working for a Britain where we have renewed confidence in ourselves and our communities. A country where hard work will be met with fair rewards and where the opportunities enjoyed by the previous generations will be there for future ones. A country where our defence and our security is assured. So let's take that message and that vision of a secure future to every corner of our United Kingdom, and let's show Labour that the British people will never be taken for granted.
I don't know why, I just can't stop looking at David Cameron. Like, he just dissociated halfway through that. He was like, is it over yet? Wake me up when this is done. That launch event was tightly controlled, something the nation got to witness when this kind of uncomfortable thing happened live on Sky News.
This is where the Prime Minister is going to speak in the next few minutes, and I'm being forcibly removed. We just simply wanted to have access tonight at Sky News, but unfortunately, we're told that because there are pool arrangements in place, we're not allowed to be here. This is, by the way, what we're trying to film is the campaign event where the Prime Minister is due to speak in the next couple of minutes. It's in front of Conservative activists. It's essentially trying to get across the message that we had in Downing Street today from the Prime Minister, talking about stability. I'm sure he's going to talk about the decision he's made. But as you can see, we just don't have access to it. It's not entirely clear why we don't have access to it.
How strange. Now, I don't know if those are actually Conservative Party people or if they're externally hired security, but if they're externally hired security, what kind of instructions were they given that made them in front of a camera basically manhandle a journalist outside of something that sounds like it was set up for a journalist to attend, which is like a kind of press conference-y type event, and with Conservative Party activists? Very odd. So having convinced the Tory faithful, allegedly, it's now time for Sunak to convince the public. That's you and me. He began on the Today programme this morning, where Sunak was challenged on his clear plan. First up was small boats.
You've not stopped the boats. Will you get anybody on a plane to Rwanda between now and the general election?
But Nick, let me just finish answering your question, right? Because my record is clear. We did get the numbers down last year and we've made good progress. But I've got a clear plan. I've got a plan that will require bold action because it means that we have to get the Rwanda scheme up and running that I'm committed to doing.
Well,
we now know that 15 other European countries, if I could just finish, 15 other European countries agree with my approach, because I'm clear that if you come to this country illegally, you shouldn't be able to stay. We must be able to remove you to a safe third country alternative. That's the only way to create a deterrent. Now, 15 other European countries just the other week agreed with that approach. The one person that doesn't is Keir Starmer.
Will anybody get on a plane to go to Rwanda before the election?
The flights will go in July, and that's a choice at this election.
After the election.
If you believe in stopping the boats, yes, if you believe in stopping the boats.
So you're having an election before you can demonstrate that your plan has worked?
No, but we've put the preparations in place. We've hired the caseworkers. We've got the airfield on standby. The flights are booked. That, as people have been seeing, we're already detaining people. But the election is about a choice, Nick, about the future. So if you think stopping the boats is important, and if you think, like I do, that you need a deterrent to do that, which, by the way, now 15 other European countries also do, then I'm the only one that's going to deliver that. I'm prepared to do what's necessary.
Okay, so
it is
your
bold,
message to
but
the British
it's a
public.
clear plan. But
I hear
the
plan,
choice
I hear
here is
bold,
clear.
but Prime Minister, let me just put the question if I could.
No,
what you're
but
saying to the public is, I've not done it yet. I won't do it before the election. I'm having the election months before I need to have the election. But trust me, I will deliver on what I said I'd do, but I haven't done yet.
Well, what you can see is that we've put it all in place.
There's something so unbelievably disgusting about seeing two extremely wealthy men who live lives wrapped in cotton wool, shielded from even the most banal kinds of discomfort, chatting so casually about, as if it's some kind of game about whether or not a plane will fly to Rwanda. Because what you miss there is the fact that what they're talking about, like it's some kind of video game, is people's lives, people who are already vulnerable, people who have already done something that shows that they are desperate for support. They've had their lives taken away from them by whatever it is, whatever reason that someone is displaced and it comes to this country in a small boat because our government hasn't established any safe routes for people to seek refuge. You're talking about ripping those people up again, displacing them again, and putting them on a plane and dumping them in a country that they have no relationship to, that they can't speak the language of, and that we know does not have a good record of how they treat refugees and migrants. And it's like the mismatch in the fact that like you have these two men who are sort of on their day-to-day life don't have to deal with a fraction of the kinds of decisions and the difficulties and the struggles that refugees face, talking about it like it's just some kind of fun gotcha question. And it's so rarely that like the actual gravity of what this is going to do to people's lives, even if one plane takes off to Rwanda, the precedent that sets for the way that people who are displaced and dispossessed are treated in this country, which, by the way, what starts with refugees always goes to everyone who's vulnerable or marginalized by class, race, whatever, migration status in this country. It always starts with the people on the edges, and then it eventually comes for the majority of people, especially of working class people. But to them, it's just like dinner table talk. Something they have a little Barney about on the radio and then go about their cotton wool wrapped lives. It's just like when you actually deep it, even though it's been so normalized in our media and we're so used to seeing matters of life or death discussed by very detached people in this cavalier way, when you actually deep it, it's like, wow, we have gotten to a really disgusting, inhumane place. Anyway, it's clear that Sunak is dangling the promise of a successful Rwanda scheme to attract right-wing votes. But that strategy will only work if voters think he can cash those checks better than competitors like Reform UK. And so far, there's little evidence of that. One of Sunak's major problems is that the general election isn't just about his record, but about the record of 14 years of Tory government. On Radio 4, Nick Robinson put that to the Prime Minister.
Keir Starmer says stop the chaos. Hasn't he got a point? There were 3 different prime ministers in a year, 4 different chancellors in a year, a Home Secretary sacked for 6 days, then hired again and sacked again a year later, a prime minister who was forced out of office because he was judged to be lying by his own colleagues in Parliament, and another who even you think crashed the economy. Why on earth should people give the Conservatives another turn?
Well, if you want to focus on, and he'll want to focus on 49 days of the last Conservative government.
I want to focus on 14 years.
And I'm happy to focus on 14 years because I'm really proud of what the Conservatives have done in office. When we came into office 14 years ago, Labour had bankrupted the economy. They left a note saying and laughing about the fact that there was no money left. Since then, we've created more jobs than pretty much anywhere in Europe, grown the economy, reformed our schools so our kids are the best readers in the Western world. We've halved crime. We've got Brexit done and ensured we're one of the biggest export economies in the world. We've increased defence spending. We've continued investing in the NHS. We've reformed the welfare system. So I am proud of that record. I'm not going to pretend that every single thing is perfect. perfect and we've got every single thing right. No government should. I would be the first to say that. But in very difficult circumstances, I'm really proud of the record of the last 14 years. But this election is about the future.
Yeah.
And in an uncertain time, the question for the country is who is prepared to take the bold action, who has got a clear plan, will deliver that secure future for them and their families and our country.
Just
and over
one
the
last
next few
thought for
weeks,
you.
I will work very hard to make the case that that is me and the Conservative Party.
It goes without saying that literally nobody, other than the absolute wealthiest in our society, feel any kind of pride over the past 14 years of this country. We've had record wage stagnation, decimated public services. The number of people sleeping rough on our streets is 120% higher than in 2010. For the people feeling that decline every day, Sunak boasting about Tory record sounds like what it is, which is delusional nonsense. Still, the topic of Sunak's ability to plan came up again in that interview.
You make quite a lot about having a plan. Didn't anybody have a plan for a Prime Minister to have an umbrella on a rainy day, or possibly to give a speech inside rather than looking like he was going to be drenched?
Yeah, I know. Well, as I said, I'm going to first to admit that it definitely was a bit wet. But look, I'm not a fair weather politician.
Did it not go to
And as I
plan?
was
Is
saying
that what
earlier-
happened?
And no, I tell you what it is, actually. I believe very strongly in the traditions of our country. And when prime ministers make important statements like that, they do it on the steps of Downing Street, come rain or shine.
Okay. After that car crash interview, Sunak turned up at a warehouse in Derbyshire. He gave a speech and took some questions from what appeared to be workers, including the man in glasses speaking on screen now. Except, as the Byline Times reported this morning, that man was not a factory worker. Instead, he's Tory county councillor for Leicestershire, Ross Hills, a part-time dentist cosplaying as a warehouse worker, because apparently Sunak seems too scared to face the real public. Now, I honestly feel like Sunak is trying to subliminally beg us to put him out of his misery, because the Tories are facing annihilation this election. And as far as they're concerned, the goal is not to win, but to minimise the damage. But with the way Starmer is suggesting that he will govern, they can rest assured that the basic Conservative agenda will be kept intact while they sort themselves out and decide what kind of ghoulish iteration they're going to eventually return in. So Rivkah, what's your assessment of how the Conservatives have kicked their campaign off? And do you think they actually realistically could manage to avoid a wipeout?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Sunak is doing everything he possibly can to ensure a wipeout for the reasons stated above, namely that he's booked the flights already to Santa Monica. You know, the deck chairs are already lined out, and he's fast forwarded into his own future, and he's kind of like David Cameron, just dissociating through the next 6 weeks, I feel. But no, I don't think there's anything that the Tory party can do to avoid a total wipeout, barring there not being an election. I find it really funny, this sort of idea that the Tories are born to rule being so perfectly epitomized by the fact that they're like, how about we just don't have an election? Maybe we should just scrap elections altogether and just sort of rule, like we were born to do. So I kind of, obviously that this is a done deal and it's inevitable for them. I think there's also an interesting question, a more interesting question about whether Labour will win a total landslide, as it could very well do, or whether there could be a bit of kind of tricky political calculus and parliamentary musical chairs going on as the election draws nearer and more seats are sort of stolen from them by people to the left of them, people independents like Corbyn and Andrew Feinstein, or, the Greens. But I mean, the question of whether or not the Tories are gonna be wiped out is, I think, a totally obvious one. But I think we should not use that as an excuse to sort of narrate this election as a rejection of Tory ideas, as a rejection of small c conservatism, because that is what Labour is pushing, and that is what Labour's going to govern on. And I think it's exactly the same as what happened to Corbyn in 2019. People said that this was an absolute rejection of Corbynism. No, it wasn't. prevalent. The ideas of Corbynism remained and remain very popular. There was a concerted effort by the media, as well as the kind of political classes, to undermine Corbyn's leadership. He didn't do himself any favours, and what happened, happened. But I think, yeah, there's a massive difference in this election between a Tory wipeout and a rejection of conservatism. In fact, I think a lot of voters will be shifting to the right of the Tories in this election, and that's what we should be worried about. People going to reform, people joining far-right grassroots groups and going to attack migrants in hotels, people going even like Farage is kind of going to be doing, supposedly, to America to bolster the far right there, the sort of Hajj of the global far right. So I think we should obviously see this election as a sort of done deal for the Tories, but we shouldn't see it as a done deal for conservatism, which is honestly a force that I'm much more worried about than which rosette you're wearing.
Labour has also launched its election campaign today. Here's Keir Starmer in Kent speaking at Gillingham Football Ground.
At long last, the election has been called. The time has come and the wait is over. And that means, through the power of our democracy, the voters now get to choose. The power of the vote, the power each and every one of you has to change our country, our community, and your future for the better. So whether you're a family that's been battling the cost of living, dealing with antisocial behaviour, whether you're a business that's been struggling for years against the odds of the economy that's in chaos under this government, whether you've served your country in whatever way, this election is for you, because you now have the power, the chance to end the chaos, to turn the page and to rebuild Britain.
Change. That's a first for political comms. What an innovation. Whilst this was a pretty low-key affair and not especially slick, the online offering was very different.
It's time for change. Britain is a great and proud country. But after 14 years under the Tories, nothing seems to work anymore. Public services crumbling, ambulances that don't come, families weighed down by higher mortgage rates, antisocial behaviour on our high streets. The list goes on and on. Political chaos feeding decline, feeding chaos, feeding decline. The answer is not 5 more years of the Tories. They have failed. Give the Tories 5 more years and things will only get worse. Britain deserves better than that. Only a changed Labour Party will get Britain's future back. And make no mistake, the Labour Party has changed, reconnected to our purpose, to serve working people as you drive our country forward, with economic stability at the forefront of everything we do. Country first, party second, always.
That is like the worst graphic design I've ever seen in my life. Why the flickering highlighter yellow words? Why? I thought my eyes were going for a second there. Anyway, Starmer's campaign is going to heavily rely on attacking the Tories' record in government, as it should. But the Tories will also be focusing on Starmer's record of ditching pledges and will question his trustworthiness or lack thereof. That was a topic that came up when Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds appeared on Newsnight.
Why should voters trust Sir Keir Starmer, whether it's his 5 missions or his 6 first steps, when he's either ditched or rolled back on so many of his original promises?
They should look at Keir Starmer and say, here is someone who has turned around the Labour Party.
No. Sorry, you've completely ignored the question. You completely ignored my question. Why should they trust him when he's ditched or rolled back so many of his original promises?
I don't think that's true. I think he stood for the Labour Party.
That's absolutely true.
Saying he could be a Labour Prime Minister.
That's absolutely true. When he wanted... Well, let me just give you some examples, if I may, Mr Reynolds. When he wanted to become Labour leader, he said he would abolish tuition fees. He said he would defend freedom of movement. All gone. Then he promised there would be this big offer of $28 billion a year for the green transition. He's rolled back on that. Those are just 3 examples. There are more.
He has put forward a set of missions that he wants to achieve in government.
You're ignoring my question.
But let me just finish the point.
No,
on things like the 28
I'd be
billion,
really grateful if you could answer the question.
28 billion was not possible after Liz Truss. It wasn't. Interest rates were not the same after that mini budget. We've got to be honest with people and say, these are our ambitions, but this is how we're going to deliver them. And when you've got a situation like that, there was simply no way we could do that. But look at what we're proposing on GB Energy, on a national wealth fund, on real ambition, on net zero, to get the economic benefits of that for the UK.
Okay, let me give you some other examples. Let me give you some other examples, which are nothing to do with the economic outlook. Workers' rights. Originally, you were going to ban 0 hours contracts. That's not happening anymore.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Absolutely, it is.
No, you're not banning 0 hour contracts. We had this whole conversation with union leaders.
Exploitative 0 hours contracts. That is part of our New Deal for working people.
You were going to abolish the House of Lords. That's free. You're not doing that anymore. Well, those are some more examples. And I come back to the question, why should voters trust Sir Keir Starmer to do what he says he's going to do this time?
Because he has a record of public service, and he has a record of how he has transformed the Labour Party.
He's got a record of dropping his pledges.
No, I don't think that's true. I honestly don't think that's true.
Just a thought, but maybe gaslighting the electorate isn't the best strategy for convincing them that you are trustworthy. Rivkah, do you think that this untrustworthiness sort of, U-turning thing, is this going to hit, do you think, like 6 weeks of this kind of talking line? Do you think that this is possibly going to dent in Labour's performance in the general election?
Well, like I said, this isn't really an election in which the electorate's being asked to love the opposition. This is not 1997. We're not we're not facing a field of sort of charismatic politicians anymore. These are sort of, paradoxically, both the driest and the wettest people you can imagine asking us for their votes. I think this is, a question of whether or not Labour is going to actually meaningfully change anything in this country. And I think in some ways, Sunak is going to be much more honest about what this election's about than Keir Starmer is. Sunak says this is about security. Starmer says this is about change. But in reality, it is about security because nothing is going to change. We're going to wake up on the 5th of July. There's still going to be a war in Gaza. The UK is still going to be abetting it. With Keir Starmer's help, probably even more. He's ideologically invested in Israel and Zionism to a degree which Sunak isn't. On the 5th of July, we're still going to have huge NHS waiting lists. We're still going to have creeping privatisation, except now it's going to be even more creeping because Wes Streeting is going to couch it in the language of reform and adaptation. There's not going to be any new money, by the way. It's just going to be, filling the pockets that normally would go into the NHS, instead going into the pockets of private, NHS contractors. We're still going to have 0 hours contracts. We're still going to have anti-trade union laws. Migrants will still be drowning in the Channel. They might not be shipped off to Rwanda. They'll just be sent to, migrant hotels to fester and possibly harm themselves. We've had a number of suicides in these sorts of hostels in recent months, not to mention things like Legionnaire's disease. Hundreds of thousands of renters will still be in rent arrears. We have developers giving talks at Labour, first steps launch events. These people are going to build houses that are just going to be snapped up by the super rich to add to their stock portfolios, to add to their property portfolios. Britain will be the same country on the 5th of July, 2025, as it was on the 4th of July, 2024. Nothing is going to change. The only change that is going to come about is through voters putting pressure on a government and on an opposition party which does not deserve their votes. We've had time and time again, it's a 2-horse race. Funnily enough, these arguments were totally dismissed during the Corbyn years. But it's a 2-horse race and you're either voting for the Tories or you're voting for Starmer. And if you're not voting for Starmer, then the Tories are a shoo-in. Well, I think, Owen Jones has launched this campaign, which I think demonstrates quite the leverage that voters have to change the course that the Labour Party, which, yes, probably will govern on the 5th of July, takes, is now. Withholding votes and pushing for actual change. Change is not going to be given of Keir Starmer's free will. We know that at every turn, Keir Starmer attempts to retract the things that he's promised to the electorate, and will do that either sneakily by sort of re-announcing things in slightly different terms, like, we just saw one of his shadow cabinet doing there, saying, we are going to scrap 0 hours contracts, just not all of them. Or he'll just kind of come out with it and say, actually, what we said back there about green energy and £28 billion, that's just not happening anymore. So we know that Keir Starmer will not willingly give the British public anything. We have to hold our votes hostage in order to get what we need.
Yeah, and I think also they've relied a lot when Keir Starmer or his various avatars in the media are his spokespeople that the Labour Party send out, their main retort to this idea of, this U-turn, that U-turn, is he says, it's different since interest rates, we're dealing in a different context, which to me, the different context is actually further evidence that things like a green transition and the kind of slightly more systemic kinds of policy packages that at one point Keir Starmer attached himself to, those are actually more urgent now than ever. But even taking this logic of, things are different now. Well, how do you explain the original big U-turn, which was the fact that when you ran to be the leader of the Labour Party and you knew that the Labour Party members, let's not forget, the Labour Party was the biggest it had ever been by that point in terms of membership. It was a hugely populous party. You told people that you were going to continue the policy legacy of Jeremy Corbyn and just sort of change the package into, like a more palatable, media-savvy package. Now, I never bought it, but that is the promise that you made in quite explicit terms. And then once you got the votes that you needed, and people voted for you on the basis of that promise, you have done everything you can to not only betray those promises and drop those promises, but to actually go on an attack spree against those very members that voted you in and start expelling anyone that you feel was too close or too supportive of the Corbyn project when it comes to even when it comes to party members. So it's not just like, this is one instance where, the context changed and therefore you had to change the offering. This has been your MO throughout your political career. There is no, you haven't been a politician for long. And at every point when you have been tested, you have showed that it is a character thing for you. It is a part of the character of the kind of politician that you are, that you say whatever you need to say to get yourself over the line. And then once you've gotten yourself over the line, the people that got you over there mean nothing to you. And people can smell that because it's not just a one-off thing, it's a pattern. And the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Anyway, other parties have been launching their election campaigns too. This was SNP leader John Swinney in Edinburgh.
Most of you want to see the back of this disastrous Tory government. Of course you do. They're even more extreme and shambolic. They're so chaotic, they don't even know when it's raining outside. Never has a government deserved to lose more than Rishi Sunak's government. You want higher living standards and a fairer country where everyone can lead secure, happy, healthy lives. You want a national health service you can rely upon. Most of you think that Brexit was a terrible mistake. You don't think Westminster works for Scotland, and you want Scotland to have a strong voice. And you want a different way of doing politics, with a lot more reaching out, accepting that no one party has all the answers, and looking for agreement wherever possible. All of those things sum up what I am about.
Lib Dem leader Ed Davey launched his party's campaign in Cheltenham, in a seat they're hoping to gain from Tory Justice Minister Alex Chalk.
As I go around the country, I meet people who are working really hard. They're raising their families. They're caring for their loved ones. They're doing everything right, playing by the rules. But they're finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. People seeing their bills go up, pensions and families seeing rocketing food bills, energy bills, rent and mortgages. And the Conservatives just made it worse. And the NHS is on the knees under the Conservatives. They promised to build lots of hospitals and they've not delivered. And people are waiting hours just for an ambulance. They're waiting weeks for a GP appointment, months for urgent cancer treatment. And these Conservatives have allowed the water companies to get away with pumping their filthy sewage into our rivers and onto our beaches. It really is time for change.
Independents are getting ready for their race too. It hasn't happened yet, but Robert Peston has reported this. I understand Jeremy Corbyn will confirm today that he will be standing as an independent candidate in Islington North. His friends believe he will win. Labour is yet to choose its candidate. As for his longtime ally Diane Abbott, will Labour and Starmer restore the Labour whip to her before Parliament is dissolved? Corbyn's decision, if confirmed, follows the completion of the CLP selection process. 2 people, Praful Nargund and Sem Moema, have been shortlisted to stand for Labour against the man who's held the seat for 40 years. Absent from that list is Paul Mason, who tweeted this. I didn't make the shortlist in Islington North, thanks to all those in the CLP who signed up to campaign for me, and to Sarah for endorsing me. It's vital that we get out the vote for the selected candidate and keep Islington North red. That's 4 out of 4 when it comes to failed attempts to get a Labour seat for Paul Mason. Also not standing in the election is Honorary President of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, who said this. I have thought long and hard as to whether I should stand in the upcoming general election. As Honorary President of Reform UK, I am fully supportive of Richard Tice's leadership and urge voters to put their trust in him and Lee Anderson. I will do my bit to help in the campaign, but it is not the right time for me to go any further than that. Important though the general election is, the contest in the United States of America on November 5th has huge global significance. A strong America as a close ally is vital for our peace and security. I intend to help with the grassroots campaign in the USA in any way that I can. Where's your nationalism gone? Nigel Farage. I thought Britain was the most important place in the world. And finally, before we move on to our other stories, a date for your diary. If you or anyone you know hasn't registered to vote yet, you have until Thursday, the 18th, to register. A woman has been charged with a racially aggravated public order offence for holding a placard depicting Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman as coconuts. Maria Hussein was at a pro-Palestine protest in November when she posed for this picture. As you can see, the placard has a picture of coconuts falling from a tree with the faces of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and then Home Secretary Suella Braverman superimposed on the coconuts. So for those who don't know, coconut is a phrase used within communities of colour to refer to those perceived as being brown on the outside and white on the inside, like a coconut. And sometimes this refers to a person of colour who betrays anti-racist politics or reproduces white supremacy in some form. Other times it can simply refer to a black or brown person perceived to have tastes or interests that are considered white. But given the context in which this placard was made, it can be assumed that Hussein was making a point about Sunak and Braverman's politics. Shortly after the picture went viral online, the Met Police pursued hate crime charges against Hussein, an ordeal she describes in this video.
My name is Maria Hussein, and on the 11th of November, I participated in a pro-Palestine demonstration in London. I had a placard with me depicting Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman as coconuts. A far-right pro-Zionist Twitter page uploaded my picture, and within 6 minutes, it was commented on by the Metropolitan Police saying that they were looking for me. Since then, I have lost my job. I have been subjected to an abusive police interview. I have been harassed by the police in the middle of the night. I've had to leave home. I've had to leave my children behind. I've had to pull my son out of school for a short period of time. I am currently 4, almost 5 months pregnant, and I'm still in limbo on whether I will be charged or whether this case will be dropped. 6 months down the line, we have over 40,000 people killed in Gaza, and the focus is on my placard and criminalizing people like me. I asked the CPS to drop the case against me. There is no hate crime being committed. The real hate crime was being committed against the Palestinian people. Palestinians need us more now than ever. They need our voices and they need our placards. Free Palestine.
So just to be clear, there are British executives and politicians signing off on the manufacturing and exporting of weapons to a regime that is currently on trial for genocide. And we're going after a school teacher for an edgy placard. Rivkah, the term coconut, is it pejorative? Yes. Disrespectful? Certainly. But is it a hate crime?
I mean, look, we have, I think, quite a shared understanding of the usefulness of the law to describe moral action. So I think it's for the police to decide whether or not it's a crime. I think we should talk about the nature of hate crime legislation in this country. But no, I absolutely do not think that it's a reprehensible thing to say. You know, it's actually, it might offend people. It might be upsetting to be called this. But I think it's actually a really important way for people of color to describe other people as race traitors, as people who might have all the trappings, superficially of a particular ethnic group, and might, obviously be part of an ethnic group to other people, but who actually act against the interests of ethnic minorities and racially oppressed people, and maybe oppressed people in general. And I think actually this is a really important distinction to be able to make in an age where the front benches of the Tory party are stacked with people of colour who often weaponize their race as a reason to enact hateful policies. Famously, we've had Home Secretaries saying that their own family members wouldn't be allowed into this country, but somehow that gives them even more of a right to enact the policies that would have prohibited their parents from coming because they know how it feels or something. Priti Patel, I think, used to accuse people of racism when criticising her tenure as Home Secretary. So I think actually in an age of Tory identity politics, when we have the sort of apparent sort of conflation and the sort of migration of ethnic minorities towards more conservative politics, particularly South Asian communities, this has been written about a lot. There was a great op-ed in The Guardian about this some years ago. I think it's actually really important to be able to make distinctions between what people would describe as skin folk and kinfolk. I often hear this term, skin folk are not kinfolk. Just because somebody shares your ethnic group, that doesn't mean they are necessarily your political ally. I think there is some comparison to be made with the term capo, which is something that I often get called. Do I think that someone should be arrested for calling me that? Absolutely not. But I would say it is probably considerably more offensive than calling someone a coconut, because it refers to a historical group of people, the Judenrat, the group of Jewish people in Nazi Germany who were conscripted to sort of staff various, elements of the Nazi sort of death machine, and who sort of abetted the project of genocide. That's if you compare that, a term that I don't think anyone should be prosecuted for, maybe have their tweet taken down or something, but definitely not prosecuted for, to something like coconut, you can see how mild these terms are. I've heard lots of other similar terms like Oreo, etc. These are kind of a way of gently pointing out that there is a distinction between someone's political interests and someone's ethnic background, and that being Black, being South Asian, doesn't necessarily make one a comrade, doesn't make one an ally. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to say. I think we should contextualize what's happening to this teacher within the context of the policing of pro-Palestine sentiment more generally, and how the most fractional of sort of attempts to breach the consensus on Israel and Palestine can wind you up arrested, or even in her case charged. We've had people being arrested for signs that say that I've got a quote here: "To be a Jew means always being with the oppressed, never with the oppressors." And then obviously we've had other people with emojis that have been interpreted as in some way offensive or sort of pro-Hamas, etc. And so really we need to be kind of understanding this as part of an attempt to ratchet up the sort of policing of pro-Palestine sentiment. as a last gasp attempt by the Tories to demonstrate that, we have a kind of chaotic, it's similar to what Sunak said on the steps of Downing Street after Galloway was elected in Rochdale, that there's chaos in this country and that only the Tories are able to get a handle on it. This sort of confected kind of, shock doctrine of like, there's a crisis, you must vote for us, is exactly what this case exemplifies, I think. I think what it also exemplifies, and I'll finish here, I promise, is just how useless hate crime legislation is and always has been for ethnic minorities. We had throughout the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, largely in response to the kind of waves and waves of attacks on ethnic minority groups, from the kind of Bristol riots to Brixton, and obviously then we get the murders of Stephen Lawrence, and then the London riots. In response to this, many communities have said, right, we need the police to be on our side. We need police liaison officers, Black police officers who can represent us in the force, as well as, ethnic community whisperers who can understand our concerns. And we need legislation that will protect us in the courts. Now, occasionally, very occasionally, that might work out. But much more often, as we're seeing now, that hate crime legislation is then weaponized by the government of the time, who almost in all cases do not have the interests of ethnic minorities at heart, against those same minorities, which is exactly why we're seeing, as Nels Abbey pointed out in his great Channel 4 segment on this a couple of weeks ago, hate crime legislation used against the people that it's supposed to protect. And I think that, for me, is the main takeaway from this. I'm not going to adjudicate on whether or not this person has committed a racial aggravated offence. I obviously hope she's acquitted, but I think that the crimes and the kind of the statutes of this country are set up in such a way as to create traps for the very people that they're supposed to protect.
The criminal justice system is not going to deliver us racial justice. And I think it's also interesting that the very people who like to portray Black and brown people as only all being all up in identity politics, and they only care about whether or not you're the same identity. They only care about they only say that only someone of a particular identity can speak on particular issues. But then when Rishi Sunak, Suella Braverman, all of these politicians were kind of round. I remember when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, there was this sense of like, well, why aren't British people of colour like happy about this? He was roundly rejected. It was roundly not considered a victory, because actually most people do have that nuance and do have that ability to say, look, we might have some shared experiences that can mean that there is like, we would expect a kind of connection, but it's definitely not a straight line from identity to politics. And if we're going to have to pick between one and the other, you always pick the politics. But they're accusing us of doing the very thing that they are banking on. And actually, I think most people of colour in this country who roundly reject the notion that Rishi Sunak's election is anything but a travesty and doesn't indicate any kind of progress on actual true racial justice, it shows that that very limited thinking is kind of restricted to the media. It's not really like everyday people have the critical faculties to understand that this is like a nuanced thing. And I think also when it comes to, the use of these terms, like part of me, I'm just like, mind your business to the police. Like, this has nothing to do with you. This doesn't concern you. This is a conversation we're having amongst ourselves. After thousands of children have died in Gaza, the question of whether or not Britain should welcome refugees, including children, from the region seems a clear one. But somehow, not everyone agrees. Here's right-wing political commentator Matthew Goodwin debating the issue with Tribune co-editor Taj Ali.
We are talking about millions of Palestinians. We never make generalizations. And if we're talking about a population where half of whom are children, are you really saying to me a 10-year-old Palestinian who might be severely injured, who might need urgent medical treatment, is a threat to this country? I think we have counter-terrorism laws in this country to make sure that
why is a 10-year-old Palestinian going to be a threat?
I think, as I say, I think the underlying principle of taking more people into Britain from Palestine,
so not a
from
single
Gaza.
Palestinian child, not a single Palestinian child where you could save a life. What crime has a Palestinian child committed?
We can get very abstract about it.
It's not abstract.
This is central to the issue because we're talking about children. We're talking about bringing children to reunite them with their
I'm not going to be
families.
bullied by liberal tears on this one, okay?
I won't be bullied by liberal tears. Wow. Again, what always strikes me about these right-wing, self-styled, tough guys is that he's dismissing the humanity here of people who have survived the most unimaginable assault on their existence, who have more strength in their pinky toe than 1,000 Matthew Goodwins could ever have, as far as I'm concerned, who have had to live in conditions that people like Matthew Goodwin wouldn't tolerate for 5 minutes. Yet he is sitting from a comfortable studio in London and under the most gentle pushing, literally just, hey, what you're saying here basically means that you're against 10-year-old children being able to seek safety from a war that they have nothing to do with. Isn't that a little bit screwed up? And he immediately feels bullied? Okay, then. Just to give you a bit more detail on exactly what Matthew Goodwin is opposing here, this segment was about whether the government should establish a special visa scheme for Palestinians with family in the UK. The Gaza Families Reunited scheme would be a cost-free visa route, enabling people from Gaza to stay with their UK-based relatives with a right to return to Gaza when it is safe to do so. This would be modelled on the Ukraine Family Scheme, under which more than 250,000 Ukrainians were granted British visas. Now, given that many of the bombs being dropped in Gaza are at least partially made by British companies in British factories, it seems like pretty much the least we could do. Indeed, Matthew Goodwin himself was all for the Ukrainian refugee scheme. In a piece for the Daily Mail last year on migration numbers between 2022 and 2023, he said this. In the 12-month period involved, for example, Britain took in 33,000 refugees from the war in Ukraine. Another 47,000 came from Hong Kong in the wake of the clampdown there. Both represent humanitarian gestures that we should celebrate. So given a model like this already exists for Ukrainians, it's really hard to justify why the same shouldn't be offered to Palestinians. Unless, of course, you think there is something uniquely different or sinister about Palestinian people, regardless of their circumstances. Here's another clip from the BBC segment.
I would say, how about neighbouring countries do a bit more?
I find that's an abhorrent statement.
How about neighbouring countries?
Don't all talk over each other, Matt, don't shout over everyone.
Do a little bit more, because you know what I care about? I care about the British Jewish community. How do they feel opening the door to more Palestinians, to people who are supportive of Hamas?
They're not.
The downplaying of Hamas on this show, by the way, is outrageous. It's an extremist Islamist organisation. The marching, the expression of sympathy for Hamas in this country has been outrageous. And I would expect Labour, after everything you went through with Jeremy Corbyn, just to be a little bit more sensitive on this issue and stick up for British Jews.
Well, let Rachel speak.
Okay. We are talking about children coming to this country, children who have got nothing. They have been moved from place to place in Gaza at the moment. They are coming to be with their mother or their father who are here in the UK. A very limited scheme for a short period of time until the horrific bombing of Gaza comes to an end. These are innocent civilians. These aren't people who are terrorists. These are people that want to be with their mummy and daddy and to have some sort of life. And I'm afraid that is the reality of what we are asking for.
Right, so Palestinians are being kettled in an open-air prison, bombed, starved, and dispossessed by British, American, and Israeli-made weapons, but we can't let them seek refuge because Palestinians are just the wrong kind of refugee. This idea that the existence of Palestinians in Britain would make Jewish people or anyone unsafe is a preposterous, dangerous, and racist trope. It frames Palestinians as barbaric, uncivilized, and as not part of broader humanity. It sets Palestinians up as deserving of their own murder and dispossession. And within that framework, no claims to innocence can actually truly penetrate. It doesn't matter if you are, as Taj and Labour MP Rachel Maskell describe, a 10-year-old child who needs to be with their parents. You can be the perfect victim. But until the core racist binary of the barbarian versus the civilized is broken, we're just going to be stuck in this endless loop where one group of people get to decide on a whim whether other groups of people live or die. Rivkah, what do you make of that? shocking segment on Politics Live today.
I really wish Matthew Goodwin had asked me, this British Jew, how I felt when he wrote a whole book about how elites were taking over the world. You know, I think Priti Patel called them the North London Metropolitan Liberal elite. You know, this is a man who, you know, if he was saying the same stuff 100 years ago, it would have been about my grandparents. It just so happens that, geopolitics has shifted and his targets are Palestinian or brown or people coming here on small boats. This man is not an ally of Jews. And it's really funny, isn't it, how you can see in that clip as he's scrambling for a sort of virtuous explanation. Because at first, when Taj first questions him, he's like, yeah, well, you know, we don't need more people coming to this country because he's anti-immigration. So that's his real reason. Then he goes to a concern about security. These people are going to, bomb us in our beds or whatever, these 7-year-olds that come here to be reunited with their families. And then when all else fails and it's clear he's losing his audience, he's like, well, what about British Jews? As if he gives a shit about British Jews. Like, get fucked, man. Like, this guy has absolutely no interest. He said explicitly that he thinks multiculturalism has failed. The idea that he's now somehow a great defender of British Jews is like an absolute joke. You know, I think that this debate is an important one for the very same reason as, you know, people say that it's important to scrutinize double standards that Israel is supposedly held to. The Palestine visa scheme is designed, I think, quite deliberately to mirror the Ukraine scheme in an attempt to obviously help some hundreds, maybe even thousands of Palestinians, but also as a sort of, you know, way of drawing attention to the double standards to which Britain and its citizens hold Palestinians. Because, you know, not a few months ago, and indeed to this day, we are accepting thousands and thousands of people from Ukraine or from Hong Kong, which I think is perfectly legitimate. But this proposal of an equivalent scheme for Palestinians shows us up, doesn't it? Because it shows that really the only distinguishing factor between these two groups is that one is brown and one is white, or in the case of Hong Kong, kind of subjects of the colony. I think this is actually a really important debate to be having, because it kind of, it just is exactly on that razor line at which racism operates in this country. The sort of plausible deniability of security reasons and terror and sort of threats of terrorism just don't wash. I think, as Taj said in that clip, we have counter-terror laws in this country, just as we've prohibited quite recently settlers in the West Bank from coming to the UK. You know, Hamas has been a prescribed terror organization since 2001. The police have got seemingly infinite resources to investigate and prosecute people for things like calling someone a coconut, let alone being a paid up member of Hamas. You know, the likelihood that someone's going to slip through the net on their way in, I think, given the virtual lockdown, the police lockdown that we're under, you know, and have been, you know, increasingly for years now, is minuscule. Like, there is no way that somebody is going to somehow slip through the net. And I think, as this panelist on Politics Live was also pointing out, the majority of these people are going to be women and children reuniting with their families here. So I think, you know, Matthew Goodwin, I hugely encourage people to look up his kind of previous form on particularly, you know, immigration and elites. And he's just so adjacent to the far right and gives it this kind of respectable gloss, which is why he still gets platforms on the BBC in places like The Guardian. But really, he should be regarded as, you know, akin ideologically to someone like Tommy Robinson. He's just able to talk the talk a lot better.
Yeah, I think what strikes me there is that when you've got this prevailing logic that there is literally nothing a Palestinian can do to make certain institutions, people, entities see them as deserving humans, then like, where do you go from that? How do you negotiate with that? But I also think, Rivkah, that your drawing of historical parallels there is really powerful, because let's not forget the Refugee Convention, which people like Matthew Goodwin have fought tooth and nail. I mean, I don't know if he specifically fought tooth and nail, but that kind of milieu of anti-immigration people have, you know, fought tooth and nail to weaken the Refugee Convention. The Refugee Convention was introduced because pre-World War II, Jewish people who were fleeing Nazi Germany were turned away from British borders because of the exact kind of language that is now being used against Palestinians. This idea that there's something inherently different, there's something inherently threatening, there's something to be inherently stigmatized about, and even like to the language, the language of invasion, the way that refugees and immigrants are talked about. That was the premise and the principles on which Jewish people fleeing the Nazis were turned away from British borders. That's why we have the Refugee Convention now. And so the irony that you're invoking that in order to continue the very kinds of mentality and the kinds of ideology that caused that historical stain on this country's, legacy, a historical stain in this country's past. I mean, it's historical illiteracy at best, and it's just, completely manipulative and misleading at worst. I mean, it's a lot of other things at worst, but I'm not going to go into that now. You guys get the picture. You're a smart audience. You know what I'm saying. News just in. Smoking ban in doubt after exclusion from the common schedule. Some of you guys may remember that we've been following this, in my opinion, kind of slightly strange ongoing story over the past few months about the Conservatives looking to ban smoking for future generations by basically constantly extending I can't remember exactly how it works, but basically the age at which people, or like the year that people can be born in, at which point they could at some point legally buy cigarettes, being constantly raised or something. I don't know. Anyway, I know what it is in my brain. I just can't express it right now. But basically there was this law to try and essentially make smoking illegal for future generations. And there's a lot of back and forth on this. It was kind of being tussled between the sort of more libertarian, I guess, anti-nanny state, whatever, parts of the Conservative Party, and the sort of more Sunak style part of the Conservative Party, although that looks like it's on its way out. And now it has been dropped after all that back and forth. It won't be included in the set of bills which are being rushed through before the next general election. And the government also did not put forward the tobacco and vapes bill, which was in early stages of becoming law. Because part of the legislation was it was meant to be passed up in the wash-up period before Parliament dissolved, but it has not. It's not going to go through. So Fox has just told me it's everyone who was born after 2009 will never be able to legally buy cigarettes. That was the original plan, but it's now been scrapped. So there we go. Although, Sunak had highlighted that smoking ban in his speech before. He was saying, we're going to make sure the next generation grows up smoke-free. So it's a somewhat minor, but, another indication that Sunak may be a man with a plan, but those plans rarely actually pan out. Thank you, Rivkah, for joining me tonight. It was a long show, but you muscled through.
Me and my elf bar are delighted about the news about the smoking ban being shelved because, as we all know, I was born after 2009 and I'm a child prodigy.
You should always match your vape to your outfit. It's the number one rule. So thanks for everyone for watching this evening. Make sure you come back tomorrow for another stream. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.